From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. Venezuela's National Constituent Assembly has approved a Constituent Decree to strip immunity from opposition leader Juan Guaido, who has led an attempted coup against President Nicolas Maduro. The body also ordered authorities to continue an investigation into Guaido. He has been under investigation since January, when he violated a travel ban by visiting a group of countries whose leaders recognize him as interim president. All schools in Venezuela are open again today following the attack on the country's power grid. President Maduro made the announcement on Twitter while asking students to go back to classes and to continue resisting. He also called on the people to let everyone know they will triumph over the difficult situation in the country. Meanwhile, throughout Venezuela, contingency plans set up by the government are active to guarantee access to food and water for all citizens. Despite the difficulties, people continue to resist.
Various designated areas to refuel water tankers are available across Caracas. From early in the morning, regular citizens, along with members of the armed forces, organized to distribute water to various communities. The main goal of this plan is to provide water for all citizens.
We are resisting in our own way. President Maduro, the people of La Cementera are with you. Neither the imperialist lackeys, nor Donald Trump, nor that Guaido will win. We have a president, and his name is Nicolas.
The terrorist attacks against Venezuela's power grid, orchestrated by the international right wing and which sought to leave the country in the dark for a long time, are confronted with the people's resilience.
Right now, we need to save electricity. We can't waste any more energy. We know water will come. We know this will be fixed. What we must focus on now is on moving forward. That's all we can do.
Women led the resistance in these communities, along with their children. They stand against violence and demand peace.
Yesterday, some people were burning trees. Why are they attacking nature now? We will continue standing here. We will not allow the violent opposition to enter here.
Teamwork and social equality is made more and more visible as foreign intervention continues to intensify. Citizens condemn being victims of a violent opposition that wants to take power by any means necessary.
Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno has accused Julian Assange of violating the terms of the asylum in the country's London embassy, where the WikiLeaks founder has lived for nearly 7 years.
Mr. Assange has repeatedly violated the agreement we reached with his legal team too many times. It's not that he can speak his mind. It's not that he can express himself freely, but he cannot lie. Or worse yet, hack private accounts or private phones. He cannot intervene in the politics of other countries, and worse yet, those of friendly countries. He cannot interfere. Why? Because he is on Ecuadorian territory, and we are responsible for him. We are going to find a solution to this. I repeat, you cannot have a person more than 6 years in an embassy and not offer the accommodations he requires, regardless of the efforts that have been made. It does not dignify a human rights of which he is entitled to. That gentleman, Julian Assange, also has rights to human rights. We are not an authoritarian regime. We defend liberty and the human rights of all human beings.
And WikiLeaks responded, telling the Associated Press, quote, "If President Moreno wants to illegally terminate a refugee publisher's asylum to cover up an offshore corruption scandal, history will not be kind." This, of course, in reference to the INA papers, which are the subject of a corruption probe involving President Moreno. Colombian activist Deiner Seferino Yunda Camayo has been shot dead by police during the social protest on Tuesday. That's according to the National Indigenous Organization of Colombia. Riot police heavily repressed participants of the protest in the department of Valle del Cauca, also leaving several injured. Witnesses said the activist died right after he was shot in the chest. Tuesday marked the 24th day of protests by indigenous, campesino, and Afro-descendants who demand that the government fulfill agreements regarding their lands and rights. The dialogue between communities and the government was called off on Tuesday as the protesters say the government has not agreed to certain guarantees. Our correspondent Milton Henao was in the Cauca department and has more.
Just behind me is located the school where the Interior Minister Nancy Patricia Gutierrez is waiting to meet with leaders from the Indigenous Regional Committee of Cauca that had been taking part in the protests. Meanwhile, very close from here, the country's Peace Commissioner Miguel Ceballos is talking to the indigenous communities of the area about the murder of one of their members, and also a roadmap for the dialogue between the government and the demonstrators may begin to yield results and put an end to the violent repression of the protests by police forces. Authorities have ordered an investigation to clarify the murder. On their part, the indigenous leaders have said Deiner Seferino Yunda Camayo died after being shot in the chest. Meanwhile, dialogue continues between indigenous leaders and the authorities in the Cauca Valley.
That was Milton Henao from Colombia. And it has been over 3 weeks since the start of the protest by the indigenous communities and the campesinos. Let's learn more about the Minga Social.
With just their traditional batons in their hands, these indigenous people in La Delfina in Valle de Cauca have been protesting in defense of life, land and peace. The baton symbolizes their oath to defend their territory and their people. Angered by the presence of the armed forces in the areas inhabited by indigenous people, campesinos and Afro-Colombians, and the constant neglect of their demands, these people decided to put pressure on the government by blocking the Pan-American highway between La Maria and La Augustina in the southwest of Colombia.
It is worrying that the national government does not show a gesture of willingness to meet with campesinos. And we are concerned about the fact that there might be a stronger confrontation than those we have had these past few days.
Their protests soon spread to 9 departments across Colombia. They call it the Minga, after the traditional collective action of indigenous communities. More than 30,000 people from about 500 organizations have joined this Minga since it was launched on March 10th. The main demand of the protesters is that the government comply with the agreements reached with the indigenous people since 1991 and guaranteed by Article 286 of the Constitution. They want their human rights be protected and their social and economic rights to be guaranteed. They also want the full implementation of the 2016 peace accord signed between the government and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the FARC. But instead of listening to their rising voices, the government responded with a heavy hand. In the police repression, over a dozen protesters have been injured.
The state always wants to clear their hands, and we know the state is going to manipulate public opinion. If something happens during a demonstration, the state is responsible because we are exercising our rights. The state is to blame if a comrade is killed. We are campesinos. We don't know how to deal with explosives. They cover their attacks against us to stigmatize the indigenous struggle.
The organization of Mingas is not new in the country. Since 1999, the indigenous people and campesinos have been fighting hard for their right to their ancestral land and their social rights. Their demands have fallen on the deaf ears of various governments. In 2006, more than 18,000 indigenous people and peasants protested to reject the free trade agreement with the United States and the re-election of Álvaro Uribe. In 2008, the protests lasted for 2 months and over 5,000 people marched to the capital, Bogota. In 2014, the indigenous people signed agreements with the government of Juan Manuel Santos. But what triggered these recent protests is the rise in the killing of indigenous leaders in Colombia since Iván Duque took the office of president in August 2018. Since then, more than 60 social leaders have been killed in the country. The marchers have been asking Duque to meet them and comply with the agreements reached with the previous governments. So far, no positive step has been taken by the government to correct what the protesters say is the historic neglect of the state.
Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika has handed in his resignation after weeks of mass protests calling on him to step down. Our correspondent Sergio Rodrigo has the latest.
The President of the Republic of Algeria, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, has resigned after he announced a few days ago that he would do so before April 28th. Bouteflika presented his resignation to the President of the Constitutional Council, as it has been reported by the country's state news agency. It has been a difficult day in Algeria. The Chief of Staff had previously called for Article 102 of the Constitution to be applied so that the President could be declared unfit for office. Bouteflika is resigning after weeks of massive protests in which people rejected a fifth term by Bouteflika, but also demanded a new electoral process. In order to do so, a transitional cabinet will be formed. The President of the Senate will lead the transitional task, and it will have 90 days to call for presidential elections in Algeria.
And people are celebrating the president's resignation. Dozens of people carrying the national flag gather in a central square in capital Algiers after the announcement. But even after Bouteflika announced he would resign, Algerians are now calling on the entire government to leave. People continue urging authorities to let them choose their leaders through fair and free elections. Before turning in his resignation, Bouteflika appointed a 27-member cabinet to rule the country until a new president is chosen.
The resignation of the president does not offer anything to the people. We want things to happen on the ground. The people want something tangible. The people want Article 70 of the Constitution, which states that people are the source of all power.
We have more stories coming up. We'll be back.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Earth. Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Indigenous leaders from the Peruvian city of Fuerabamba, who have been protesting for 53 days against a mining project, have rejected the government's offer of dialogue. Indigenous leader Gregorio Rojo was freed on Friday after being detained for a week on allegations of extorting the Chinese Enterprise Minerals and Metal Group. Rojo said he will not negotiate with the government to put an end to the conflict whilst his legal team is still in jail. Community leaders are demanding payment for the right to use a highway that crosses their lands to transport copper from the Bambas. And also in Peru, indigenous leaders from the Amazon arrived in Lima for the March of Sacrifice, demanding that the government of Martín Vizcarra solves the situation that communities are enduring due to constant oil spills.
Indigenous leaders arrived in Lima after a trip of more than 50 hours. They said that this is the only way to let the state know about the situation indigenous communities are going through in the Peruvian region of Loreto.
We are not here on a trip. We are here to let them know that our forests, rivers, and fish are contaminated due to oil spills. We no longer have food, We exist. We are people. We want to be heard, and we want the authorities to give us solutions.
According to the Amazonian leaders, half a century has passed since international companies and the state started exploiting indigenous lands. However, leaders say the communities haven't received any benefit. They added their people are living in poor conditions and that their natural resources are being affected.
Oil is the heart of Peru, which generates economic resources that don't go to our people. We don't receive any help. There are no improvements to education, health, nutrition, and transport. We are out here without light, roads, water, or sewers.
The indigenous delegation was received in Lima by the president of the ministerial cabinet, who committed to create a commission that monitors the situation of the communities and addresses its demands. However, this isn't the first agreement signed by the state with the communities, and the leaders have already lost faith in these methods.
The indigenous federations from each part of Loreto, from other provinces and districts are coming together. If the government doesn't address our demands, we will start a mobilization and an indefinite strike. This is when the state must pay attention to us, because we live in an oil-rich area, and still we are living in poverty.
The indigenous communities of Loreto are asking the state to declare a state of emergency in all the communities of the Amazon basins affected by oil spillages, and that the resources from the oil revenue must be invested in projects of development for their region.
Former Chief Prosecutor Thelma Aldana would not be allowed to run for Guatemala's presidential elections. Our correspondent Mario Rosales explains her case.
Guatemala's top electoral court has rejected the candidacy of former Chief Prosecutor Thelma Aldana for the upcoming presidential elections on June 16th. This comes as the court accepted 3 challenges to her candidacy. After the decision was made, Aldana, member of the Seed Movement Party, took to Twitter to announce that she will appeal the ruling at the highest authority in the country. She is free to appeal the decision. However, she faces 2 major issues. One is that there is not much time until the election, and the second is that she is out of the country, since there is a detention order against her. Some analysts say there are very powerful secret groups behind the prevention of her candidacy. It is suspected that this is because during her time as chief prosecutor, she brought corruption charges against many people. Even though she's also accused of corruption, her case will likely go to the Constitutional Court, which will have the final say.
That was Mario Rosales from Guatemala. And in other news, Ecuador's President Lenín Moreno says Julian Assange has repeatedly violated the terms of his asylum in Ecuador's London embassy, where the WikiLeaks founder has lived for nearly 7 years. Moreno says Assange hacked private accounts or phones. Our correspondent Denise Herrera in Quito has more.
A strong condemnation of Assange from President Lenín Moreno.
Too many times Assange has violated the agreement made with his attorney on his behalf. He can speak, but he cannot lie. He can hack numbers in private accounts, but he cannot breach policies, because he is in Ecuadorian territory.
However, Carlos Poveda, Assange's lawyer, has rejected these allegations against his client. The entire defense team of Julian Assange highlighted that they are really worried about Assange's health.
He has aged. For 7 years, he hasn't seen the light of day. He's had limited access to medical care. There are restrictions. He needs to see a medical specialist, but he's had no access. The legal team is also restricted. The last incident with the journalist shows that there are limitations, and it's very difficult to visit him.
President Lenín Moreno also denounced WikiLeaks before the UN for hacking private information and publishing it in digital media. Denise Herrera, Telesur Quito, Ecuador.
Dozens of forest fires have destroyed protected areas in Costa Rica. Some 60 million square meters have been scorched since the beginning of 2019. That is the equivalent of more than 5,000 football fields. The Environmental Ministry said that 16 of the affected hectares were protected areas. According to the authorities, there have been a record 108 incidents since 2007 for the first 3 months of the year. We're taking one last break. Stay with us.
discover the cultural diversity that defines a continent. The place where art and tradition are part of the same nucleus. Artistic expressions, values, passion, and more. Real life. Fridays, only on this world.
Welcome back. 3 people were killed and a number of women were kidnapped in Niracongo, a Congolese village in the province of Goma. Now the group is asking for $20,000 for their release. People say they haven't lived in peace since 1995, and now they are mobilizing, urging for their safety and the end of corruption.
These offices were shut down after a protest where people in Niracongo are calling for the return of the legitimate Wami Bakumu.
There are politicians and officials who used to belong to the rebels. There are murders, arbitrary detentions, kidnapping. The police, a professional police, is supposed to protect demonstrations, but unfortunately not in our land. We haven't had our native authority for more than 20 years.
We have been here for more than 100 days and we will continue until we have our legitimate Wami 11, Bigaruka Bakumu back.
25 years is too much time. We, Congolese, have agreed on how to live in peace, but we are just not allowed.
In order to respect our rights, our leader has to also be respected. After Mwambi Kaembe, it was Bigaruka. After Bigaruka, Bankugu. And after Bankugu, his son Lebon.
The last Wami was killed in an attack in 1995 perpetrated by the rebels that ruled in North Kivu until 2003 peace agreements. Since then, the area has been ruled by interim bosses that are not recognized by the population.
Here we are not safe at all. If we are not allowed to be ruled by our Wami back, then you are responsible for anything that may happen. We should be allowed to have our Wami back as part of our tradition, because in our culture killing is forbidden, even looking at someone's blood.
Rwanda used to protect the M23 position from its hill. Our territory is politically managed by our neighboring country. It is easy for this country to work, to do politics here and destabilize the territory of the Masisi, Rutshuru, Walikale, and even the whole country.
The Niracongo is located between the border with Rwanda and the National Park of Virunga, where armed groups hide, among them the Rwandese FDLR.
Nothing has changed in our lives after the elections. We need our Mwawi so he can put an end to this and protect our development.
People have to sell their little piece of land to survive, all because of the conflict. Each family here has lost at least one relative, or 2 or 3.
The solution has yet to be found.
South Africans are remembering the late anti-apartheid veteran Winnie Madikizela Mandela. Affectionately known as the Mother of the Nation, Winnie died on April 2, 2018. She was a prominent figure in the battle to end the apartheid system alongside her late ex-husband, Nelson Mandela. After her husband was jailed in 1962, she continued her activism despite harassments, arrests, restrictions, and imprisonment by the apartheid regime.
I think fate determines your...
And wildlife rangers in Kenya have rescued 3 elephants that were stuck in the muddy waters of a lake. It is believed that the elephants got stranded in the mud while searching for drinking water. Climate change has led to reduced amounts of rainfall in many parts of Africa, making it increasingly difficult for animals to access water.
I think basically when we look at what is happening around, all the rivers that are feeding into the lakes are drying up. And this is a dangerous trend in that at some point we will not have water in any of these lakes. So we really need to protect catchment areas so that we have continuous water coming into the lakes and retain the lake as it were.
Israeli security forces have once again stormed Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque complex. According to witnesses, at least 10 Israeli soldiers stormed the complex before assaulting 3 guards and arresting 2 individuals. Since February, Israeli authorities have banned Palestinians from accessing the Al-Aqsa mosques, which Muslims regard as their 3rd holiest site after Mecca and Medina. Meanwhile, Israeli authorities have demolished a Palestinian-owned residential building in occupied East Jerusalem. According to Israeli officials, the building was built without official permission. In recent years, Israeli authorities have demolished dozens of Palestinian homes on the pretext that they have been built without permission. And with that, we come to the end of this news brief, but you can find more on these stories by going to our website, telesurenglish.net. And for our viewers in Africa, you can find us on Starsat channel 461 in South Africa and 539 in Nigeria, and you can join us on social media as well. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.